Everyone hits a bump in the road. What do you do with it? Be inspired as we explore the ways people experience, navigate, and manage the ups and downs and twists and turns in this road trip called life. Welcome to another episode of Bump in the Road. The basic podcast is always free. We also have a premium subscription called Bump 2 that lets you listen in on extended behind-the-scenes conversations with our guests. Check it out at www.bumpintheroad.us. Have you ever felt like the weight of your past traumas was physically holding you down? Ann Hince, the author of A Pathway to Insight, can help you heal that. Ann takes us on her own healing journey where she discovered emotional freedom techniques, EFT, also known as tapping. Tapping impacts the body's energy meridians to clear emotional issues for physical and psychological healing. Ann's story is not just about overcoming the past, it's about unlocking a life of depth, peace, and true self-awareness. Please welcome Ann Hince to Bump in the Road. Ann, welcome to Bump in the Road. If you would, tell us your story.
Thanks, Pat. It's lovely to be here. Okay, I'm just going to give you an overview of my story. And that was a lot of trauma in childhood, not necessarily more or less than other people, but a good amount of different traumas, and culminating with my mother's death when I was 19. And life went on. And it wasn't until I was in my late 30s that I needed something to change because it wasn't working for me. So I ended up going to a doctor's appointment, and he had this technique. He knew of this technique that is called EFT, that I'm sure we'll talk about. And he tapped with me about my mother's death for about 15 minutes. And I walked away from that appointment being able to tell the story in my mind for the first time ever without the tears there, because they had always been just under the surface for all those years. And I didn't know that you could just release them. I didn't know that they were stored in the body, and I didn't know you could just release them so easily. So for me, that was kind of the first step on my journey. And I continue to use that technique for many years. I still use it occasionally now. And that released the big emotions. I worked through all my traumas and released all those emotions that have been stored inside of me for all those years. And life started to change. I became less reactionary. I was more peaceful on the inside. My mind was quieter. It was so nice. And because I changed on the inside, things on the outside changed. So life in my household became more peaceful because I was more peaceful. And what I realized as I was going through that EFT is kind of opening up the subconscious mind. And as the subconscious mind opens up, our self-awareness deepens. It's like one and the same thing. So I became aware of my emotions that I hadn't been aware of before. Then I became aware of the physical sensations underneath the emotions. And at that point, then I started to use a different technique that I call feeling your feelings, which is more somatically based. And I would just feel all those emotions that I had kept inside. But I'd done my childhood. So at this point, I was doing more collective traumas, things like 9/11 or the Loma Prieta earthquake that I was in. So things that everyone knows about, but we all had our different emotional feelings, emotional memories around those events. So I would release those, and I felt so good. And at some point, I realized I could keep my awareness inside my body after the tension had released, which was really weird. Never heard of it before. I didn't know what I was doing, but I just kept playing. I knew I was on a path, so I just kept going. And I realized I could move my awareness around inside my body, and I could feel tension compared to no tension. So I would put my focused awareness or my focused attention on the tension, and it would relax. It would release a little bit. So I just kept doing that, moving throughout my torso, eventually putting my awareness inside my head, which was so eye-opening for me because I had so much pain and tension inside my head that I had no awareness of before. Like I'd lived 50 years of my life and I did not know I had so much pain in my left cheek primarily. But at this point, I had a technique, right? So I just would focus on it, allow it to release over and over again. And it got to the point that I could actually feel my skull bones relax. Now, I hadn't known they were not relaxed before, right? I wasn't aware of it until they relaxed, and then I could feel the shift. And so eventually I had x-rays taken. I had orthodontic work throughout my life. So they were just orthodontic x-rays, but I could see the shift in my skull bones from 8 years prior. And I could see how much had changed. And so that's what I'm doing today. I'm still working deep inside my skull, inside the bones, inside my nose, my palate, my jaw. And I'm releasing more and more tension that, again, I'd not been aware of before. And most of us, I don't think, are. But we hold so much tension on the inside. So I'm just working through it step by step by step. And I've also grown 3/4 of an inch. I've actually decompressed 3/4 of an inch is the way I think I'm describing it now, because I've just released that burden that was holding me down, holding my neck down. And as a result, I've actually got taller, which is rather nice.
That's cool. That's incredible. I've had numerous guests that have talked about the emotional freedom techniques or tapping, but I think that your book explains it better than just about anybody. But one of the questions I have is how does EFT correlate with energy movement in your body or emotional movement in your body?
Well, when we bring up some kind of memory that we may be aware of the emotions or not, it doesn't matter. If we bring up a memory, we're re-triggering those emotions inside of ourselves, inside of our nervous system. And the tapping, where we're tapping on the ends of meridian systems, the tapping interrupts that nervous system. It interrupts the emotion that's stored inside related to the story. So the words that we're bringing up are related to the emotions, and then that's in the nervous system. So the tapping interrupts that normal trigger inside of us, and it releases the energy from the emotion that was stored inside the nervous system.
I'm almost speechless. That's really stunning.
Yeah, it was for me the first time I tried it, for sure.
One of the things you mentioned in your book that I also thought was stunning was how words, just simple words, provide an entree into emotional experiences.
It's amazing, yes. I mean, just imagine the word mother, right, or mom, right? Just that word, it's stored with all sorts of memories around our mother and other mothers that we've known about. They're all stored inside of us, kind of connected through that word. Because when we've experienced the event or the story or whatever, we've always said to ourselves in some way, okay, that was my mother doing that. We've always known that. So inside of us, it's connected to the word. So after I'd done quite a bit of the tapping, I spent 15 minutes tapping on the word mother or mum, just tapping with the word mum. And all these memories would come up about my mother, which then I could tap through those. Also, it was really interesting tapping on the word love, because we have this concept of what we think of as the word love. But when I tapped on that word love, the memories of my mother came up, which did not feel like the traditional love, right? It did not feel loving. So I think we all have a different concept of that word love. And it's really interesting to release the memories we have around the word love. Because I think in society, we're looking for love, and we think we're looking for the lovely concept of the word love. But really, we're actually looking for what we know of as the word love. And I think that's why we often go round with relationships that don't really feel loving underneath, but we think at the beginning that that's what we're looking for.
When we release our preconceptions, what's left?
Truth, peace. It just is. Yeah. And my goal was always inner peace. And I didn't realize this was really the way and how deep it could go. But it's just peace. It's not replacing it with anything else. A lot of the positive thinking in the world today actually suppresses the actual thinking that we're having, right? And it keeps that energy stored in the body. So once we release the energy, we don't have to look for the positive. It's just there. It's naturally there underneath. The peace and the positive thoughts just come naturally once we've released the negative. And when I got deep inside my body, right, when I could actually sense inside my body, what I realized is the tension that's stored inside is the darkness. It's dark. And as we release the tension, the light is already there underneath. And it starts to show through as we release the darkness. So we don't need to look for the positive. All we need to do is search out the negative or the trauma or the programming, everything that we stored inside of us from our past. If we release that, the light is already there underneath.
I want to go back to positive thinking because it's such a pervasive notion in our society. If you think of wealth, you will have wealth, that kind of thing. And it's always been a very hollow idea to me. And I think it's because of exactly what you bring up. Talk a little bit about how positive thinking is a very shallow and ultimately ineffective way to change our lives.
Well, what a lot of us don't realize, because it's stored in our subconscious mind, when we're trying to think something positive, so like you said, we're trying to think, wealthy thoughts, underneath our subconscious is saying all these negative thoughts from what we've learned about money over the years. Now, we may be aware of them, and we may just be consciously suppressing them, right, which doesn't help. Or we may, let me try again. We may not be aware of them, but they're still inside of our subconscious mind. So really, if we're searching for wealth, what we need to do is find out all the reasons we're holding wealth away. What we thought about rich people, what we heard our parents say about rich people when we were children, what they said about money, how they felt when they were doing their finances. All those concepts that we stored inside of us around money doesn't grow on trees, right? All the phrases people said, that's what we need to search out and we need to release. And even we could consciously think about wealthy people we know, and we could use EFT and tap through how we feel about them, right? What do we really think about them? Not what we think we should think, but what do we really think? Are we jealous of them? Quite possibly we're jealous of them if we're not wealthy ourselves. So we need to dig out all those emotions and release the energy around them, right? So that we can come to peace, so that we can be at peace where we are now, right? With the amount of money we have now. And so we can be at peace with other people and how much money they have, right? And at that point, whatever's supposed to happen is going to happen.
I think once you start going within, it's kind of the ultimate journey in your life, partly because it's unending, partly because it leads to ever greater self-awareness, which is a real game changer in terms of how you interact with life, don't you think?
Yeah, it's a really interesting journey, and you have to go down the journey some way, like a little bit further down the path, in order to see the path, right? And to see that things can change. I've interacted with some people on Facebook who will get really annoyed because they don't see that things can change. So you have to experience it for yourself a little bit so that you can see there are changes, right? You can look back and say, okay, that's how I used to think, or that's what things used to be like. And now they're like this, right? Once you have that perspective, then you know it's a path, right? And then you know you can keep going. And the path gets easier along the way, right? It's hard to begin with because all this trauma and everything that's been tumultuous inside of you has to release. But once it releases and you start to see what the journey is about, right? In my mind, it's about noticing what's happening on the inside, feeling it, releasing it, and then moving on to the next thing. Once you see that and you experience it, it becomes so much more easy. And we feel lighter, right? It's an enlightenment process. It's an enlightenment path. So we become lighter, right? We actually I remember feeling so heavy, energetically heavy when I was in my 20s and 30s. And that has lifted, right? So it becomes easier to laugh, right? It becomes just easier to do things. You feel lighter. And so many things happen, right? So there's so many changes along the way. It feels really good to release tension that have been stored in the body for decades. It has to feel good, right? And it does, right? So it's a fun journey once you can realize that it's a fun journey.
Yeah, I tend to think of it as a game, actually. And it's fun. I mean, yes, it's hard. It can hurt. You have to be willing to sit with some real discomfort on occasion. But on the other side of that, as you say, there's such lightness. And it always amazes me that so many people shy away from that initial experience of discomfort.
Because they don't want to go there. Some people, I mean, it sometimes feels like those emotions are going to annihilate us. They are so big, we don't want to feel them. But once you realize that it's just inside of you, right? It's not anywhere else. Those memories and those emotions are just inside of us. And once we realize that it's just energy that is stuck inside the body, it wants to release. All it has to do, all we have to do is find a way to allow it to release. And then there's freedom on the other side. That then you know, right? So for me, it was after I went back from that doctor's appointment. I have an engineering background, so I didn't necessarily believe that one experience with the doctor was it. So I went online and I learned everything I could about EFT. Now, Gary Craig, who's the person who developed it, gave it away for free. So anyone could go online and learn all about it. And I wanted to try it out on something more simple because my mother's death was a big trauma. So I had a 17-year-old cat at home at the time, and his kidneys were starting to fail. So we'd been told we had to give him a daily saline shot, so like an injection of saline solution. And the first day I gave that to him, my hand was shaking so badly. I knew I wasn't going to be able to do it every day. It was just too traumatic for me. So I thought, well, let me try this out. Let me try out EFT. So I tapped about it. I tapped about every aspect of it, which is something you want to do with EFT. So I tapped about my hand shaking. I tapped about my fear of hurting my cat. And I tapped about all the injections I had had over the years. And the next day, that needle slid right in. My hand wasn't shaking at all. All the fear that had been living inside of my body that day before had totally disappeared. And that's when I realized how powerful it is and that the freedom is on the other side of that fear. And that is where I wanted to be. So that's really what made me start doing it. And I wrote down all my childhood traumas, multiple sheets of paper, and I worked through one each night. And just things started to change as I went through that.
Well, it goes to having contrast in life. Like I always say, you can't understand hot until you understand cold. And you can't understand dark until you have experienced light. I mean, they balance each other out in their own way. And I think as you dig through all this emotional riffraff we all have, you start to develop these points of contrast. And that alone is game-changing because you realize there's choice, whereas before there was no choice. In terms of how you felt, how you reacted, it was programmed. And when you release the programming, now you have choice. That's a game changer.
Yeah. And I often notice that people who had the most trauma in their early lives, it's like they're pulled off to one side a long way. And even physically that happens in the body, I know at this point. So we actually have further that we can go in the other direction.
Yes.
So it tends to be people who've had the most trauma who actually seek out the spiritual path, right? They're looking for something. They know there's some other alternative to where they are right now. Whereas people who really haven't had much trauma aren't really interested in this because they don't have a lot to release.
I was at dinner with somebody not too long ago, and I asked them about what was one of the biggest bumps in the road you've ever had. And she paused, and she kind of thought for a moment, and she said, I don't think I've really ever had one. And I thought that is impossible. You must be repressing an awful lot. Because it is not possible to be 50 or 60 years old and not have had a serious bump in the road.
Well, my husband really hasn't had many. He had a really good childhood and things have gone pretty smoothly for him. But I certainly had my bumps in the road.
Why is it that some people get this easy road and others among us have multiple bumps we have to deal with?
It's an interesting question. I don't know for sure, but I know we get programmed in childhood. So those of us who have a traumatic childhood will often attract similar things, right? Similar emotions, because those emotions were stored inside of us in childhood and became part of the signal that we emitted to the universe. So that feels normal to us. So we will attract similar things in our future, those similar feelings, in order for us to notice them and release them. And that's why some of us just do the same thing. It feels like we go round in circles again and again with the same types of relationships or the same types of events. And some people just have drama over and over and over again. They don't know how to get out of the cycle, but the cycle is showing them the path to healing, right? Our job is just to notice what we're feeling and to work with those feelings to release them so that next time the cycle comes round again, we don't react the same way. Right? So our signal has changed at that point. And then if we do it again, if we feel how we're feeling, if we work with those emotions, then the next time, again, it will be less. We will react less. We will react differently. And eventually, the cycle won't repeat again because it doesn't need to, because we've worked through those emotions.
Yeah, the trauma, it becomes repetitive. I had a very interesting experience along these lines recently where somebody, the best way to explain it would be they stabbed me in the back, they turned the knife, then they pulled the rug out from underneath me. Kind of rude. And my reaction is what really caught my attention. I was furious, absolutely furious. And I was on a Zoom call and I looked at myself and I thought, is that me? I don't want that to be me. And I really looked at my reactions and decided I would choose a different path. And I think that becoming aware of when you hit emotional turmoil, to look at it and try to see what underlies it is really important. And I think there are a lot of ways you can come to that kind of degree of awareness. I know you're not into meditation. I am. Meditation for me has been game changing because it has given me that awareness, that separation of my mind from the removal of monkey mind and the separation of mind and soul, if you will, really, so that you can watch yourself. You become an observer. And for me, that's become really a key piece. But then if you follow it up with EFT, where you can absolutely release what you're observing, that's a killer combination.
Right. So let me just go back to your example there and explain why what I have done has been subtly different, because that's one of the things I've been trying to work out. So what is it that I have done that has been different to what the other teachers out there are teaching? Because I've got to a place that I don't believe they have, like listening to their words. And it's that. So if I was on a Zoom call and I felt absolutely furious, I'm accepting that feeling of being furious. I'm feeling that furiousness. I'm feeling that anger inside of me. And that's what the EFT does, it allows you to feel it and release it, rather than the mental concept of making a choice, right? If I in that moment chose to do something different, in some ways I'm suppressing that anger inside of me, right? Whereas what I'm doing is I'm feeling that anger, allowing the energy of that anger to move around my body and release, so that next time if someone does exactly the same thing, that anger isn't inside of me the same way, right? It's not going to come back. It's not going to be a reaction. It's going to be different. So do you understand that subtle difference there?
Absolutely. And I think that when I observe that kind of thing, it's an indication that I need to look into the source, the energetic, emotional source of it. And what was interesting about this particular situation is the person who made me so angry was obviously just going through a repetitive behavioral cycle, doing the same thing again and again. And he's done it to many people. And I talked to several people and they were like, oh yeah, that's how he treats people. And, so I kind of had to laugh a little bit.
Now, let me get even more detailed here,
Okay.
because I find it fun. So I've realized, now I didn't know this to begin with, and it's only been the last couple of years that because I used to do the same thing. I used to ask why, right, and get to the answer, and then I would tap on that. What I've realized in the last couple of years, that even going into the mind and asking why is a slight suppression of the actual feeling, because you're going into the mind rather than in the body, right? So feeling that anger and allowing it to release is so powerful. And if we ask ourselves why, and we kind of come up with an excuse for the other person, we've taken our focus away from feeling that emotion in the body, right? We've gone back into the mind and we're thinking and we're making an excuse, right? So in some ways that's suppressing the anger, whereas it's the energy of the anger itself in the body that we want to dissipate so that it doesn't come back again next time.
Well, and I would say anger has a lot of facets to it. It can include bewilderment, for example. It can have many, many different layers. And I think that you have to start working through all these layers. Anger sounds so overwhelming, but in reality, it's made of a lot of different things.
It is. And when working with EFT, that's one of the great things about EFT is you work with what the current anger, the current word is, whatever it feels like, right? If it feels like anger, you can tap on the anger. And then as you tap, it's releasing that emotion, releasing that resistance. And then ask yourself, what is the next? What does it feel like now? Maybe it feels like resentment or some other thing. And then you tap with that, right? So it goes through the layers one at a time, opening up the subconscious mind.
Do you recommend people journal as they go through this process?
Yes, I think it would be a great idea. I wish I had.
Well, it would be so interesting to look back at how you recognize and experience your own levels, your own components of an emotion.
Yes. And how it hooks into memories, because you're reacting like that because you've experienced it before. Yes. So inside of you, it will be hooked into memories from the past where you experienced the same feelings. So as you're tapping, as your subconscious mind is opening up, a memory is likely to pop into your mind of, oh, this reminds me of that time. And then you can work through that time. And then maybe another memory will pop up from early childhood, perhaps, where you first felt those feelings. And they got stuck inside of you because you didn't know how to deal with them as a child. So that's the cyclical nature, right? Those different memories are when these emotions have replayed throughout your life. And as you release the energy of them, they're not going to come up again anymore.
How are you spreading this wisdom?
I'm trying as best I can. So I have my book, A Pathway to Insight, and I have a workbook that's with it, a Pathway to Insight workbook, which will ask questions to bring up all your traumas and all your programming so that you can work through that. I'm very active on Facebook these days. And let's see, YouTube. I have quite a few YouTube videos, including a couple, well, 3 actually on EFT that would be important if someone was starting out, because a lot of practitioners of the EFT these days go towards the positive, whereas the power in EFT is the negative. So I have an EFT demo on there. I have a video about the words to use with EFT and a video about how your body gives feedback of how you're releasing energy during EFT. So I have that. And recently I've just started a Buy Me a Coffee page where I've got a membership where I'm putting more detailed information about my journey that I don't feel comfortable yet putting totally out into the open. Mm-hmm. But I've also got a video series on there that I just released this last week that I'd edited from a seminar I gave last year. So
what is your YouTube channel?
It's just my name, Ann Hince.
If you could give some words of hope and wisdom to somebody really stuck in a bad place in their life, or their things just keep falling apart, what 2 or 3 things would you tell them?
Well, the first step, I would say, would be start noticing. Just start noticing how you're feeling during the day. because until you notice, you can't do anything about it. So that I would say, would be the first step. But in terms of hopefully motivation, there is so much more depth to life than we realize when we're in that place of being stuck. I had no idea how much depth there is to life, because the more we're aware inside of us, right, the deeper our self-awareness is, the deeper our awareness outside of ourselves. So I can sense feelings and emotions in other people. I can understand why things are happening outside of me because I have that understanding inside of me. I suspect you can too. But there are other changes too, right? We can start to hearing, right? A lot of people would just hear with their ears. But as we release the tension inside of our bodies, we can feel sounds and music throughout our body. And can you imagine how much more satisfying that is then to listen to beautiful music? And my head, right, I've released so much tension in my head that I can sing notes that I could not sing before, right? So my voice has changed. My posture has changed as I have released tension. It has released to a more self-confident posture. I did not have that before. And if I had known I could become more self-confident just by doing this work, I would have done it a lot earlier. So there you go. There's much more depth to life than you know. And there's a great incentive to do this work. You just have to start and you have to want to do it.
Thank you for listening. I hope you'll support this podcast by becoming a Bump 2 subscriber. Buy us a cup of coffee. It's your support that makes this podcast and website possible. I hope you found something in today's podcast that inspires you along your own life's path, because sometimes a bump in the road is actually a portal into a more conscious and meaningful life.